Gove's new extremism announcement comes at a time when the Conservative Party is under scrutiny for what many would call extremism in its own ranks. Its biggest donor, Frank Hester, who gave the party at least £10 million in the last year, is reported to have actually called for a serving MP to be shot. On BBC Breakfast, the racist remarks Hester is alleged to have made and hasn't denied about Diana Abbott were put to Gove.
When Frank Hester allegedly said that, and I want to get this quote right, "I don't hate all black women at all, but I think she should be shot." Is that an extremist view?
Well, speaking as someone who was pursued by an individual who was trying to kill me and who subsequently succeeded in killing one of my friends in Parliament, I take that sort of language very seriously, and I think it's unacceptable.
I'm sorry, that's not quite what I asked. Is that an extremist view, and would it fall under these new rules, these new definitions of extremism? I can repeat the quote for you if you wish again.
Well, I take these things exceptionally seriously, and because I take them seriously, it would be the case that any assessment about whether or not an individual or an organisation is extremist would have to follow a rigorous process. It wouldn't be me making a decision on the basis of a quote, however horrific. It would be a due diligence process that would be conducted very carefully.
Such a rigorous process that allowed him to read out the names of 3 advocacy groups in Parliament with apparently no evidence of their extremism, and was done simply on the basis that they happen to be Muslim advocacy groups. But no personal beefs involved in any of this pursuit of a redefinition of extremism. Over on Good Morning Britain, Susanna Reid had another go at getting Gove to talk.
When somebody says something about hatred and violence, which leaves the MP, who was the target of those comments, saying that she is frightened, she feels vulnerable, she's worried, and refers to the fact that 2 MPs have been murdered in recent years, and that this sort of talk is alarming, that presumably does come under your definition of extremism.
Well, as I say, the first thing is that I'm an admirer of Diana. I think that her work throughout her career, particularly in advancing the cause of better education for children from disadvantaged backgrounds, is wonderful. She should never be subject to language of this kind, and it is a recorded fact that Diane, like many women in public life and many women of colour, has received and been on the receiving end of the most objectionable and horrific language and threats, and for the reasons that we were just discussing. Threats against members of Parliament and people in public life are something I know about and take incredibly seriously. It's because of that the government has a responsibility not just to call out racism, but also to work with organisations that are promoting unity, social cohesion, a greater degree of tolerance and understanding. And my job as a government minister is to work with those organisations and individuals on the ground who are attempting to bring communities together, who are attempting to counter anti-Semitism, attempting to fight anti-Muslim hatred, and attempting also to deal with racist prejudice of whatever kind.
The extreme opinions of another Tory donor, GB News founder Paul Marshall, were also raised with Gove in Parliament.
This tweet was liked by Sir Paul Marshall. "Civil war is coming. There has never been a country that has remained peaceful with a sizable Islamic presence. Once the Muslims get to 15 to 20% of the population, the current cold civil war will turn hot." Many other incendiary tweets were liked or retweeted by Marshall, a substantial donor to both the Tory party and the Secretary of State personally, according to a recent Hope Not Hate newsagent's investigation. How does the Secretary of State square his definition of extremism with accepting money from someone like Marshall?
Well, I deprecate the personal attack on Sir Paul Marshall, who is a distinguished philanthropist and the supporter of ARC academies, which are state schools that have done so much, including in the Honourable Gentleman's constituency, to improve the lives of disadvantaged children from a variety of minority backgrounds.
Gove has previously described himself also as a, quote, proud Zionist. On LBC, he was confronted by his own rather extreme views on Palestine. In his 2006 book, Celsius 77, Michael Gove said that, quote, appeasement of the Palestinians by the Oslo Accords encouraged al-Qaeda to commit 9/11. The Oslo Accords were a pair of agreements signed in the 1990s between Israel and Palestine, intended to begin the process of re-establishing a Palestinian state. So it's not hard to read Gove's remark as suggesting that Palestinians should never have been offered a state. On LBC, he was asked where he now stood on the issue.
Do you still believe that the Oslo Accords were appeasement?
I, again, believe that it's vital that we bring people together at a time of division in order to ensure...
That's lovely, but do you still agree with yourself that the Oslo Accords were appeasement?
Well, I think it's critically important that all of us recognise the need for moves towards a sustainable ceasefire in the Middle East. And again, foreign policy, like security policy, moves on to take account of new realities. It's vitally important that we ensure that the threat to Israel from Hamas is dealt with. It's also vitally important that we ensure that a path towards a secure and viable state,
with a two-state solution?
A democratic home for the Palestinian people is secured as well.
And you agree with the two-state solution?
Oh, of course, yes, absolutely.
So Gove there saying his views have changed as realities on the ground have changed. But just a moment later, Gove seemed unwilling to even acknowledge those realities.
The UK law recognises Gaza is occupied. Is UK law wrong?
No, I think UK law is right, but I think it's important also when we're dealing with these inevitably sensitive questions to recognise that
So Gaza is occupied by Israel?
Well, at the moment, it is the case that there is a terrible conflict going on there that followed on from the slaughter of...
what it is the British government thinks about what is going on in Gaza. Gaza is occupied by Israel, isn't it?
Well, at the moment, an horrific conflict is going on there. Israel, understandably, wants to ensure that Hamas no longer poses a threat after the events of October the 7th. But it is also the case that we need to ensure that the Palestinian people get the aid that they need.
Does Michael Gove recognise that Gaza is occupied by Israel?
Well, I recognise the vital importance of the British government speaking with one voice on foreign policy. We have an excellent Foreign Secretary in David Cameron, and I support everything that he says and does.
It's not quite a yes. Okay. What is going to...
It is a yes.
It is a yes. Good.
But?
But?
No buts. It is a yes.
Sound like there's a but to me. Helena, my question is, how do we on the ground cope as the government gets more extreme, becomes more draconian, yet keeps trying to convince us that the problem is with peaceful protesters?
The natural reaction is that we should be fearful of the government engaging in incredibly draconian, as you say, legislation and changes to definitions, essentially centralising power in a very small number of individuals to be able to define what is and is not extremist. Use this for political point storing and demonise an entire movement that we belong to. This is something that we're fearful of. But it's also worth noting that this is desperate moves from the government. And governments only do desperate things when they are also fearful. And what they are fearful of is the fact that we're winning. Right? We're winning the argument on this one. All of the smears, the discussions of hate marches and trying to smear all of the pro-Palestinian movement as being Islamist or whatever, which is, to be fair, which is what this all is. This is all in response to the pro-Palestinian movement. They think they can get an electoral advantage, and they're not going to get it. They're going to get wiped out the next election based upon current polling anyway. It's not doing them any favours. And on top of that, none of these smears are actually coming through when the public get polled about these issues. All of these different changes to how they operate in government, they can't stop us from seeing the images coming through on our phones. They can't stop the general public hearing and seeing what's happening in the Palestinian territories at the moment. And when it comes to what the public think about issues of Palestine and Israel, they overwhelmingly agree with us on these issues. A supermajority of the general public have wanted a ceasefire for months, have supported one. A plurality of people in this country believe that, also a supermajority of people in this country believe that Israel has committed war crimes throughout this most recent conflict. A plurality of people in this country, when polled by YouGov, have said that they believe that the military intervention of Israel was unjustified. And of course, there is widespread government disapproval from the public on the issue of Israel and Palestine as well, and of course more broadly too. So whilst we still need to organise, That doesn't mean that anything can stop. We have to continue organising. If they smear or they try and get rid of one particular group by labelling them as extremists, then we can always find more and better ways of organising around what the government do. That's what the left have done, despite plenty of opportunities the government have had to try and demonise and try and marginalise the left. We've always managed to find a way of organising around it. I always have the trust in our movement to be able to do that. But in terms of the actual discussion of this issue and the public opinion, we're winning people over, and the government cannot stop us from being able to continue to do that.